The morning of the 19th of February 1945 looked like the gates of hell had opened on the Pacific. From the horizon, more than 450 American ships filled the sea, their decks bristling with guns that thundered without pause. Battleships hurled 16-inch shells into a speck of black volcanic rock called Iwo Jima, while rocket ships spat streaks of fire that lit up the dawn. Overhead carrier aircraft swooped down, hammering the island until it seemed no living thing could possibly survive. And yet, as the first wave of US Marines stepped off their landing craft and sank knee-deep into the soft volcanic ash, the island roared back to life. From hidden bunkers and invisible pillboxes, Japanese machine guns and mortars erupted, cutting through the surf with murderous precision. The Marines, stunned, realized the bombardment had barely scratched the surface of an underground fortress. This was not just another Pacific island. Iwo Jima was a fortress carved out of lava and sulfur, with 11 miles of tunnels linking thousands of bunkers, gun positions, and hidden artillery. For the Japanese, it was sacred ground, an outpost to defend the home islands at all costs. For the Americans, it was a key to victory, a stepping stone for bombers to strike Tokyo, and a lifeline for crippled B-29 seconds struggling back from Japan. What followed was one of the most brutal battles in USP's Marine Corps history, where American firepower would turn a tiny volcanic rock into a flaming nightmare, and where courage, sacrifice, and sheer determination would be tested to their very limits. By early 1945, the Pacific War had entered its most relentless phase. From the Mariana Islands' giant B-29, superfortresses were now striking deep into Japan, raining destruction on Tokyo, Nagoya, and Osaka. Yet every time the bombers took off, Japanese radar outposts on Iwo Jima spotted them coming, giving Tokyo hours to prepare. Fighters scrambled from the island to intercept, and anti-aircraft crews were ready before the American bombers even appeared on the horizon. For the Japanese, this tiny, sulfur-reeking island was a shield. For the Americans, it was a dagger pointed at the heart of their bombing campaign. Iwo Jima itself was barely 8 square miles, just a black speck between the Marianas and Japan. But its location was everything. Lying almost halfway to Tokyo, it provided 3 airfields from which Japanese fighters harassed the B-29 seconds. More importantly, the island offered a place where crippled bombers leaking fuel or trailing smoke could attempt emergency landings. To the planners at US Pacific Command, Iwo Jima could save thousands of American airmen, and as the Allies prepared for the final invasion of Japan, control of Iwo would eliminate a deadly obstacle on the road to victory. The task of taking this volcanic fortress fell to Admiral Chester Nimitz's mighty Pacific Fleet under Vice Admiral Raymond Spruance's Fifth Fleet. The ground assault was entrusted to the V Amphibious Corps, consisting of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions. In total, more than 7,000 Marines would be hurled against roughly 2,1,000 entrenched defenders. The Americans believed their overwhelming firepower, naval guns, carrier, airstrikes, artillery tanks, flamethrowers, and engineering units would crack the island in days. But on the other side, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had different plans. Unlike many Japanese commanders who squandered men in desperate banzai charges, Kuribayashi forbade suicide waves. He ordered his troops to dig in, to fight from underground, and to bleed the Americans slowly. Over the course of months, his men carved a labyrinth of tunnels and bunkers into the sulfuric rock. 11 miles of subterranean passages connected strongpoints, mortar pits, and pillboxes. Some chambers even contained operating rooms for battlefield surgery. Above-ground pillboxes were camouflaged so perfectly that even after days of bombardment, they remained invisible until they opened fire. The terrain itself was a weapon. The beaches consisted of loose volcanic ash swallowing boots, tracks, and wheels. Tanks would bog down, bulldozers would struggle, and men carrying heavy packs would sink with every step. Towering above it all was Mount Suribachi, a 550-foot volcanic cone dominating the southern end of the island. From its slopes, Japanese artillery and machine guns could sweep the beaches with deadly crossfire. To the north lay the Motoyama airfield's flat plateaus transformed into a killing zone, later nicknamed the Meat Grinder. To prepare for the assault, the U.S. Navy unleashed one of the most ferocious bombardments of the Pacific War. For 3 days before the landings, battleships and cruisers hurled thousands of shells, while waves of aircraft dropped tons of bombs. Entire sections of the island disappeared under plumes of smoke and dust. From the decks of the Invasion, fleet sailors cheered as explosions rocked Iwo Jima, believing nothing could survive. Marines aboard landing craft whispered that the Japanese must surely be dead. They were wrong. Beneath the shattered surface, Kuribayashi's garrison waited. Orders were strict hold fire until the beaches were packed with Marines, then open up with everything. It would be a slaughter. For the Americans, the stakes could not be higher. Capturing Iwo Jima meant shortening the war-saving bombers and paving the way for the eventual invasion of Japan itself. But it also meant stepping into a nightmare of fire steel and volcanic ash. Many Marines would not return home. When the invasion fleet assembled over 450 ships, a massive armada stretching across the horizon, it symbolized the sheer might of American industry and determination. Battleships, carriers, destroyers, rocket ships, transports, and landing craft gathered in a display so overwhelming that German officers in Europe later admitted they could not imagine such power. But all the ships, planes, and guns in the world would still have to face the fury of an enemy determined to die in place. As dawn approached on the 19th of February 1945, American Marines looked across the black beaches, knowing the price of victory would be steep. Ahead of them lay the tunnels, the pillboxes, and the hidden guns of Iwo Jima. Behind them, an entire nation watched and prayed, and above them, the flag of the United States was ready to fly if they could seize the volcanic rock that guarded Japan's doorstep. This was the stage set for one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific, where American firepower would clash with Japanese defiance, and where the struggle for a tiny island would shape the destiny of nations. On the morning of the 19th of February 1945, the invasion began. The sea was churning with landing craft as wave after wave of U.S. Marines pressed forward toward Iwo Jima's black volcanic beaches. Overhead, American aircraft screamed down in strafing runs while battleships and cruisers unleashed deafening broadsides. Rocket ships fired salvo after salvo, their trails of fire slicing across the horizon. To many, watching the island looked like it had been pulverized into dust. But when the first landing craft dropped their ramps, the illusion shattered. Marines poured onto the ash-laden beaches only to find themselves immediately bogged down. The sand was not sand at all, but a powdery volcanic ash, thick and soft as flour. Men carrying 70-pound packs sank knee-deep with every step. Tanks spun their treads, helplessly bulldozers churned in place, and jeeps stalled almost as soon as they touched shore. The beach offered no cover, no solid ground, and no relief. At first there was an eerie silence. Then, like the opening of a monstrous trap, Japanese guns thundered. Mortars, heavy machine guns, and artillery hidden in pillboxes and tunnels erupted in a coordinated storm. The air filled with smoke, metal, and screams. Marines dropped in rows, cut down by fire they could not see. A battlefield report later noted, "They had us sighted like ducks in a shooting gallery." The shock was complete after 3 days of pre-invasion bombardment. The defenders had barely been touched. Every foot of progress came at a brutal cost. The Marines struggled to clear pillboxes, each one, a fortress of concrete and steel buried into the hillside. They attacked with grenades, flamethrowers, and satchel charges, often fighting point-blank at the mouths of dark tunnels. The Japanese would fire until the last moment, then vanish underground only to reappear from another exit and strike again. Entire squads were lost in sudden eruptions of fire. The southern end of the island was dominated by Mount Suribachi, looming like a sinister sentinel over the beaches. From its slopes, Japanese gunners rained shells across the landing zones. Suribachi had to be taken, and quickly if the Marines were to have any hope of survival. Over the next 4 days, the 5th Marine Division pushed relentlessly south, encircling the mountain in a ring of steel and blood. Combat around Suribachi was vicious. Marines used flamethrower tanks, Shermans nicknamed Zippos, to flush out bunkers. With jets of fire reaching over 40 yards, they turned hidden fortifications into furnaces. Engineering teams crawled forward under covering fire, carrying explosives to blast shut tunnel entrances. Every advance was paid for with lives. One Marine later recalled it wasn't about yards gained, it was about staying alive another hour. By February 23, after days of grueling combat, Marines reached the summit of Mount Suribachi. At 10:20 a.m., a small patrol raised a U.S. flag on a steel pipe. The sight electrified the men below. Ships' horns blared, Marines on the beach cheered, and photographers captured the moment. Hours later, a larger flag was raised, immortalized in Joe Rosenthal's famous photograph, an image that would become one of the most iconic of the entire war. Yet, for all its symbolism, the flag raising did not end the battle. Suribachi was only the southern anchor. To the north stretched the true nightmare, the Motoyama Plateau and the meat grinder. But in that moment, atop a smoking volcano, Marines felt a surge of pride. Against a foe who seemed impossible to dislodge, they had planted the stars and stripes on Japanese soil. For the defenders, it was a shocking sight. Kuribayashi's men had sworn to resist to the last, but seeing the American flag fluttering above Suribachi struck a deep psychological blow, and yet they fought on. The Japanese commander knew that every day he held Iwo Jima cost the United States dearly in blood, and that was his mission, to inflict maximum casualties no matter the cost. By the end of the 5th day, Suribachi was secure, but the Marines had paid a staggering price. Thousands lay dead or wounded. The beaches were littered with burned-out vehicles, wrecked landing craft, and the bodies of men who had never made it past the surf, and the worst was still ahead. For now, though, the focus shifted northward. The airfields beckoned, and so did the most savage fighting of the campaign. The Marines had survived the anvil of Suribachi, but the hammer of the meat grinder was waiting. If Mount Suribachi had been a nightmare, the northern plateau of Iwo Jima became pure hell. After the flag was raised on Suribachi, many Marines hoped the battle was nearly over. In reality, the campaign had only just begun. Ahead lay the Motoyama airfields, the Turkey Knob Hill 382, and a labyrinth of fortifications that Marines would soon christen the meat grinder. The plateau was unlike the southern slopes. Here the ground was flat and wide, scarred by craters' ash and shattered runways. Yet beneath that ground stretched Kuribayashi's masterpiece, a defense-in-depth system of bunkers, tunnels, and interlocking pillboxes that turned every advance into a death trap. From every angle, Marines were caught in overlapping fields of fire. One squad leader described it bluntly: "We weren't advancing through terrain. We were advancing through a shooting gallery built to kill us." The first objective was Airfield Number 1. Marines charged across open ground, pockmarked with shell holes, every crater hiding Japanese riflemen and machine gunners. Mortars rained down, often fired point-blank from underground exits. Casualties mounted by the hour. Flamethrower teams moved forward, spewing sheets of fire into the bunkers. Tanks rumbled across the runway, firing point-blank into pillbox slits, while combat engineers crawled forward with satchel charges to seal tunnels. Each strongpoint took hours, sometimes days, to eliminate. And yet for every bunker destroyed, another would open fire from the flank. By the end of the first week, Airfield No. 1 was in Marine hands, but at a staggering cost. Thousands of men had fallen, and Airfield No. 1, Tol Umed Justahed. Here the Japanese had constructed an even deadlier network. Marines soon realized that Kuribayashi had designed his defenses to absorb and slow every assault. Progress was measured not in miles, but in yards, sometimes just a few dozen yards a day. The names given to the battlefield revealed the horror: the amphitheater, the gorge, the quarry Turkey Knob. Each was a fortified position that bristled with hidden guns. Hill 382, the highest point on the plateau, became the linchpin. For nearly 2 weeks, Marines launched repeated attacks, supported by tanks, artillery, and airstrikes. Each time they advanced, they were met with ferocious fire from concealed bunkers. The hill became known as the meat grinder because entire companies were chewed to pieces trying to seize it. American firepower was overwhelming, but often blunted. Battleships offshore delivered pinpoint barrages, but the tunnels sheltered the defenders. Aircraft swooped low to strafe and bomb, yet when the smoke cleared, Japanese machine guns were still firing. The only solution was direct assault. Marines crawled forward with flamethrowers, rifles, and grenades, engaging in brutal close combat. Many strongpoints were only silenced when flamethrower tanks blasted fire into every opening, followed by explosives that collapsed the tunnels inside. For the Japanese defenders, life underground was a nightmare of its own. Sulfur fumes choked the air, water was scarce, and wounded soldiers lay untreated in sweltering darkness. Yet Kuribayashi's discipline held. There were no wasteful banzai charges. Instead, his men fought from cover, striking suddenly, disappearing and striking again. American officers were stunned by the tenacity and cleverness of the defense. We underestimated them, one Marine colonel admitted, and our men paid the price in blood. By the third week, the Marines had secured Airfield No. 2 and were grinding toward the island's northern end. The fight for Hill 382 raged without pause. Tanks were knocked out one after another by concealed artillery. Mortar rounds fell incessantly. At night, Japanese infiltration teams slipped behind American lines, ambushing isolated positions. Exhaustion set in. Entire units were reduced to a fraction of their strength. One Marine wrote in his diary, "We are ghosts moving through black ash. The island is eating us alive." Still, the Americans pressed forward. The combination of firepower and relentless determination eventually began to crack the defense. By early March, Marines were within striking distance of the final Japanese strongholds at Turkey Knob and the amphitheater. Each was reduced in turn by concentrated artillery napalm strikes and close assaults. Slowly, the Japanese resistance collapsed into smaller pockets, fighting to the death inside bunkers or launching desperate last stands in the open. Kuribayashi's men had inflicted terrible losses. By the time the northern plateau was under Marine control, thousands more Americans had fallen. Casualty reports shocked the commanders. Some rifle companies were down to fewer than 50 men from an original strength of 200. Entire battalions had been mauled beyond recognition. And yet the American flag now flew over the airfields of Iwo Jima. The meat grinder had lived up to its name. It consumed men machines and weeks of savage fighting, but it also proved something else. American firepower, coordination, and sheer grit could overcome even the most carefully planned defenses. By mid-March, the island was nearly secured, but the final chapter of the battle was still to come, the last desperate gamble of General Kuribayashi himself. By mid-March 1945, the northern end of Iwo Jima was a wasteland. Black volcanic ash was churned into deep craters by weeks of bombardment. Burned-out tanks sat like twisted skeletons. Corpses lay in heaps, Japanese defenders who had fought to the last breath and Marines who had clawed forward yard by yard. The island was nearly in American hands, yet one man still refused to surrender: Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi. Kuribayashi had sworn to fight until his last breath, and his strategy had already stunned the Americans. Unlike other Pacific battles, there had been no wild banzai charges. Instead, his disciplined, coordinated defense had inflicted over 2,000,000 American casualties. But now his resources were gone. His troops were starving. Ammunition was nearly exhausted. Medical supplies were non-existent. Still, he prepared one final stroke of defiance. On the 25th of March 1945, as the Marines believed the battle was winding down, Kuribayashi launched his last desperate attack. Under cover of night, nearly 300 survivors of his once mighty garrison crawled silently from their tunnels. They were not a mob of fanatics, but a disciplined raiding force carefully organized and armed with rifles, grenades, and bayonets. Their target was Airfield No. 2, now the bustling hub of marine logistics on the island. At first, the darkness concealed their approach. Then, just before dawn, the Japanese erupted from the shadows. They stormed into the rear areas where cooks, engineers, and supply clerks had believed themselves safe. Suddenly, mess tents were shredded by gunfire. Supply dumps erupted in flames. A bulldozer operator fought with his sidearm until he was overwhelmed. For a few terrifying hours, chaos spread through the American rear. Marines scrambled to grab rifles and fight in the flickering glow of burning fuel dumps. The surprise was complete. More than 100 Americans were killed in the raid and nearly 300 wounded. The violence shocked the Marines, who had thought the enemy all but destroyed. One survivor later wrote, "It was like ghosts rising from the earth. We thought the island was secure, and then the shadows came alive." Kuribayashi himself is believed to have led or at least orchestrated the attack, though his exact fate remains a mystery. Some accounts claim he died in the assault, others suggest he committed suicide in a hidden bunker before the raid. What is certain is that his final operation displayed the same discipline and cunning that had marked the entire defense of Iwo Jima. This was not a futile banzai charge. It was a carefully planned raid aimed at proving that even in defeat, Japanese soldiers could still strike terror. The Marines, stunned, at first quickly rallied. Riflemen formed defensive lines. Tanks clattered into position, their machine guns cutting down raiders. Engineers hurled satchel charges into clusters of attackers. By mid-morning, the last organized Japanese assault had been crushed. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of Kuribayashi's men. The final organized resistance on Iwo Jima had ended in fire and blood. 2 days later, on March 26, the island was declared secure. After 36 days of non-stop combat, Iwo Jima had finally fallen. But it was a victory drenched in sacrifice. More than 6,800 Americans lay dead and over 19,000 had been wounded. The Japanese garrison of over 21,000 had been annihilated with only a few hundred taken prisoner. For the Marines, the end brought little joy. Exhaustion was etched into every face. Units that had once been hundreds strong now mustered only a handful of survivors. Rifle companies had been reduced to platoon strength. The cost was almost too much to bear. A Marine chaplain wrote in his journal, "We have taken the island. But the island has taken a part of us that can never be replaced." And yet the struggle on Iwo Jima revealed the essence of the Pacific War. It showed the extremes of American power: naval guns, airstrikes, tanks, flamethrowers, and sheer industrial might clashing against the unyielding will of an enemy determined to die where he stood. It showed how one determined general fighting from beneath the earth could force the most powerful military on earth into a battle of attrition. And it showed above all the price of victory when two nations collided in a struggle with no retreat. As the smoke cleared from the northern plateau, Marines reflected on what they had endured. The image of the flag on Suribachi gave them pride, but the memories of fallen comrades filled them with grief. The survivors of Kuribayashi's last raid left a lasting impression the enemy could strike even from the grave. The Battle of Iwo Jima was over. But the lessons of its climax, the ferocity of the Japanese defense, the staggering cost of the American assault, and the desperate final strike of Kuribayashi would echo into the next battles, especially Okinawa and the looming invasion of Japan's home islands. Victory had been achieved, but it was a victory that tasted of ash. When the guns finally fell silent on Iwo Jima, the island itself looked like the surface of the moon. Every tree had been blasted away. Craters pockmarked the volcanic ash from one end to the other. Smoke still drifted from collapsed tunnels where Japanese defenders had fought to the last man. But amid the devastation, the stars and stripes flew, proudly signaling an American victory purchased at a terrible cost. The numbers told the story with brutal clarity. Of roughly 21,000 Japanese defenders, nearly all were dead. Fewer than 300 were captured, alive, proof of General Kuribayashi's strict orders to fight to the death. For the United States, the butcher's bill was staggering: 6,821 Americans killed and more than 19,000 wounded. It was the only battle in the Pacific where U.S. casualties exceeded those of the Japanese. Commanders were stunned by the bloodshed, but they also understood what had been gained. Strategically, Iwo Jima was priceless. In the months that followed, more than 2,200 crippled B-29 superfortresses made emergency landings on its runways. Each one carried a crew of 10 or 11 men. Historians estimate that nearly 24,000 American airmen owed their lives to this black volcanic island. For the families waiting back home, Iwo Jima became not just a battlefield, it became a lifeline. The island also gave the U.S. Army Air Forces a base for P-51 Mustang fighters. From Iwo, long-range escorts could accompany the B-29 seconds all the way to Tokyo. The effect was immediate and devastating. Japanese industry, already buckling under relentless bombing, now faced unbroken pressure. For the enemy, there was no respite, no safe skies, no hope of halting the tide. Beyond strategy, the battle carried immense symbolic weight. The flag raising on Mount Suribachi, immortalized by Joe Rosenthal's photograph, captured the spirit of American determination. It became an icon of courage, sacrifice, and unity. Back home, the image spread across newspapers, posters, and war bond campaigns. It inspired a nation weary of war to push through to final victory. For the Marine Corps, it became a sacred emblem etched into the very identity of the service. The cost, however, haunted every survivor. Marines who walked away from Iwo Jima carried memories of carnage that would never fade, comrades torn apart by machine gun fire, flamethrower tanks, igniting bunkers, the smell of sulfur and death hanging over the island. Many later confessed that they had believed they would never leave alive. The battle was seared into their souls as one of the fiercest tests of their lives. For the Japanese, the loss of Iwo Jima was a grim revelation. Kuribayashi's strategy had inflicted unprecedented casualties, but even his brilliance could not stop the American advance. Japan's leaders watching from Tokyo realized with horror what awaited them on the home islands. If such ferocious resistance could not save Iwo, then what chance did Japan have when the full weight of American firepower descended on their homeland? The answer was bleak. It was precisely this realization, the inevitability of catastrophic losses, that later shaped US decisions on how to end the war, including the use of the atomic bomb. The legacy of Iwo Jima also lies in the extraordinary valor displayed by American troops. 27 Medals of Honor were awarded for actions on the island, the most ever given for a single battle in US history. Marines and Navy corpsmen repeatedly charged pillboxes, shielded comrades from grenades, and advanced through storms of fire. Their heroism embodied the Marine Corps motto, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. Even decades later, Iwo Jima remains a touchstone. Its black sands are remembered not only as a place of horror, but as a testament to resilience and sacrifice. The island became a permanent US military outpost until 1968, when it was returned to Japan. Today it stands as a symbol of reconciliation, an island once soaked in blood, now visited by veterans from both nations who honor the fallen on both sides. Ultimately, Iwo Jima's significance is measured not just in strategy or symbols, but in lives. It saved thousands of American airmen. It provided the stepping stone that brought the war closer to Japan's doorstep. And it reminded the world that freedom often demands a price paid in courage, endurance, and sacrifice. As one Marine veteran later said, "It was a hell we walked into, but from that hell came hope. Every bomber that landed here, every crew that lived, proved it was worth it." From a volcanic rock turned fortress of death, Iwo Jima became a beacon of survival and a lasting chapter in the story of American resolve.